Your Olympic hero has arrived. It's true, it's true.
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another game review. That's right, boys, I'm finally getting around to reviewing the YIIk update, YIIk 1.5, also known by the fanbase as IV, because the 1 and the 5 are Roman numerals, similar to the 2 in the Y2K in the title. So with YIIk, as you guys know, I, over time, became a pretty big fan of YIIk during 1.25, and was really excited for 1.5. I said many times leading up to the release of 1.5, telling my friends about it, that like, yeah, it's going to be an entirely different game. And even then, I feel like I underestimated that a little bit. I remember when I installed the file, and I saw that the game had doubled in size, I was pretty fucking excited, to say the very least. Now, that said, there will be spoilers in this review, so you have been warned. I'm going to spoil the game, as well as New Game Plus, which is an entirely different experience than it was during the original game, so you have been warned. I'll briefly go over what YIIk is, even though I already did 2 reviews of it. YIIk, or as the actual title originally is Y2K, a postmodern RPG, although there are now references in the game where it's referred to as YIIk as well, which is really funny, is a modern-day RPG that is inspired by old-school RPGs. It's sort of an homage and parody of old RPGs, right? Things like Earthbound being the most apparent. It's also sort of a critique on nostalgia and obsession with that sort of thing. Has always had sort of a thing that went over people's head a lot of the time when they reviewed it. They didn't realize that the game itself was actually critiquing that sort of culture and mentality as well as homaging it. And it's also critiquing things like internet mysteries and things like that, and people who obsess over people who go missing and stuff like that. That's what the whole Sammy storyline is about. A lot of people didn't realize when the game first came out that Alex is an unreliable narrator, and a lot of what you see in the game isn't what's actually happening. I think that in this new update, that is much more apparent. The new update does a very good job at making it much more postmodern and much more surrealist. That said, a lot of the postmodern aspects just went over people's heads when they played through it the first time. Like I said, I became quite a believer in the game the more I played it, and started to realize just how retarded a lot of the criticism was of it, and how a lot of people who hated on the game didn't actually get it. And I know that sounds pretentious as hell, but I was one of those people that didn't get it until I started watching Hellcry's videos, which I talked about in a whole other video, where I, went down the YIIk rabbit hole and talked about how it went from ironic appreciation to genuine, right? Let's actually talk about 1.5, though. What's so different about this new update? Well, quite a lot. Like I said, the game doubles in file size on the installation. I knew going into it that there would be more endings, and that there would be new stuff in New Game Plus, and a bunch of stuff like that, but I did not expect what it got. So I knew that the Nameless Child was going to be a character in it, as well as Asuka, and Kasage X. However, I didn't realize just how essential and critical to the story a lot of these characters would become. Kasage X appears frequently throughout the story. There's sort of a film within a game meta to it, where Kasage X is making a film and the game is part of that. So that's sort of a recurring sort of plot device and wraparound throughout the game. You see it particularly in the Yuzu fight, and by the way, Yuzu's also been recast, for the better, I think, actually. I do think the Yuzu fight is much, much cooler now in basically every way. But obviously, not only is the Yuzu fight changed, but, like, there's a whole new cutscene leading into it. And that's true. There's every dungeon now has a boss fight, which is pretty cool. They added a boss fight to the end of every dungeon, which wasn't the case originally. There's a few more bosses, to say the least. But not only is the boss fight different, but they also completely overhauled the combat system. And so the combat system was the thing that I was both very excited and very skeptical about when I saw all the pre-release material. Because, as you guys might know if you've watched me play the game and talk about it a bit, I'm probably one of the people who champions for the old combat system the most. I quite liked the old combat system, even if it was a bit janky at times, a bit repetitive at times. I actually really liked it. I liked the uniqueness of the minigames, and I had a lot of fun with it. The new combat system eliminates all the mini-games altogether, which I was pretty disappointed about, but I also had heard that you'd be able to use the old combat system, which is true in New Game Double Plus, which we'll get to later. However, currently that is not true on the PS4 version, which we will get to later, because the PS4 version has a lot of unique issues, which we'll go over. So, what does the new combat system entail? Well, it plays much more like a traditional turn-based RPG, so it cuts out the mini-games, you just have skills and abilities and attacks, and defense and items and things like that. It plays like a pretty standard RPG. But it is still a very unique system because they introduce a new mechanic called Carta. Now, Carta are essential if you want to not die. Also, the way that the health system works is also entirely different and unique than what it used to be. Now, instead of just having a standard health bar, you have your Carta that protects you. Once your Carta is destroyed, you can get into a bleed state, and then that's when you can take damage. So, your Carta actually is a lot more important than your actual health bar most of the time, and that's also true with enemy Carta. And different Carta has different strengths and abilities. Carta themselves typically have a active effect that's on you while you have them, and they also have a use effect. The active effect often is something like a stat boost, but some of them are like passive abilities, like gaining better items, or being able to attack enemies' health bars directly without having to destroy their Carta, things like that. There's a few different types of Carta you can get. Early on, I was doing alright without having to worry too much about Carta. But the more you progress through the game, the more you definitely want to focus on making sure your Carta is good for the battles you're having. One of the things I was actually worried about with Carta is I thought it would overcomplicate it when I saw the pre-release stuff, but actually using it in gameplay, once you get the hang of it, it's actually really, really simple to understand. In addition to the Carta being added, like I said, there are a bunch of new characters. I already mentioned Kasage X, who typically appears as a story wraparound device. Although, again, this game is very surreal, and it's even harder to tell what's going on in the real, like, what's actually happening, even more so than before. But now it's a lot more obvious that things aren't as they appear, because, again, it's very surrealist now, the game is. But amongst those new characters is the Nameless Child. Now, the Nameless Child is a young girl who has very, very surrealist sections of the games that you play through switching back and forth between her and Alex. Her sections are very unique and distinct from the Alex sections because there's platforming, which, I mean, there's a little bit in the Alex section, but nowhere near to the same degree. Not that you can jump or anything, but there's these little jump pads that let you jump at specific points. But during an initial playthrough, the Nameless Child doesn't do combat like Alex does. Typically, you have to avoid enemies or pick up, they're not Carta, but it's similar. You get these items that let her use specific abilities during specific levels. At one point, she gets a gun. At another point, she gets this twirl that lets her spin and destroy enemies that way. Each section with the Nameless Child has new mechanics it introduces, one of which was even a survival horror section, which has tank controls initially until you pick up the gun. That's easily one of my favorite sections of the game, by the way, because it's very reminiscent of things like the original Alone in the Dark or the early Resident Evils. In the Nameless Child sections, there's a lot of stuff about the good brother or the bad brother, being Rory and Alex, and the Nameless Child believes herself to simultaneously be Carrie, Rory's sister, and Alex's sister, Allison. Of course, the true nature of the Nameless Child is revealed later in the game. Nameless Child sections also feature the Golden Alpaca a decent amount, so they give him more fleshed out appearances and things like that prior to you fighting him. And he does, of course, still have all of those little cameos where you can find him, just like in 1.25. Another change that they made is a lot of the encounters you would typically find on the map when you're exploring no longer exist. So random encounters when you're just walking around on the map are gone, in favor of just having the enemies on the screen that you run into to start a combat. I think that this is definitely a change for the better, because the random encounters, though there was a set amount, can get annoying to grind through when you're first playing through it in 1.25. So it was a pleasant change that the only way to fight enemies is to actually encounter them. They also added new areas, such as a forest between the windmill and the factory hotel, and that has a lot of the enemies in it as well. The menus that you use in-game have been completely overhauled as well, with a completely new user interface that, again, is for the better, is easier to understand, has things like auto heal, and also lets you quit to the main menu, which the game didn't used to do. One interesting change I noticed in new combat is there's no escape option, so you can't flee from combat just on its own. So, as you can imagine, if you've played through the game before, this raised some questions for me about the first Soul Survivor encounter, which in the initial version of the game, up until 1.25, the only way to quote-unquote win that battle is to flee, and then you come back later with either Vela or Essentia to get rid of it, using either Banish or Essentia to kill it. Come to think of it, is there even a runaway option? One way to find out. Interesting. I am genuinely curious how we get past the Soul Survivor. What the hell? I hadn't even thought of that. Gun draw? What the fuck? When did my... I mean, I knew he had a gun in the trailer, but what the hell? That's awesome! I did find out later that there's smoke bombs you can use to leave battle. And something that is cool is you can actually use all of your tools in battle for different things. So it's not just Panda Barrier anymore. Once you get the skateboard, you can use that to flee battle, and then you don't need to use smoke bombs anymore. You can also use Dali and the flamethrower in battle, and the flamethrower will cause constant fire damage. I never used Dali in battle, so I don't remember what he does, so forgive me on that. But the flamethrower does cause fire damage over time, so that can be pretty useful at times as well. And the amp can be used to deal pretty decent damage too. And Hair Whip basically functions like Flail in Pokemon, whereas the more damage you have on you, the more damage it does to the enemies. So the lower your health, the better of a move it is. They also spaced out the placement of the Hair Whip better than it was in the older versions of the game. You used to get it back-to-back with the amp, both in the sewer. Now you get Hair Whip in Mount Town Cave, which is much more natural, I think, and spaces it out so it doesn't feel as redundant as it did in earlier versions. All of the Hair Whips that were in the sewer were, of course, replaced with rocks to be destroyed with the amp. Another cool thing about this version is they added over 100 new songs, including restoring Battle Against Vela Wild, albeit this time as a battle theme within Vela's Mine Dungeon. Oh, that's awesome! This is the original Vela theme! Fuck yeah, dude! The one from 1.0, I was really hoping they'd put this back in the game somewhere. Fuck yeah, dude. I'm glad they put this song back in the game. Crow battle theme plays at a much more fitting time. It plays at the first time you play as Essentia in the van. Alright, I'm curious to see how Essentia plays in this version. Oh, fuck yeah! Crow battle theme here! Fuck yeah, dude! God, I love this song. It also plays when you fight Crow in New Game Plus. Also, the Factory Hotel was completely overhauled. The dungeon's completely different design now. Like, there's still elements that are the same, but the main center area has been completely changed, so all that stuff with the ladders is gone. Which, yeah, it makes it more simple, but unfortunately it means you can't fuck around with ladders like you could in the older versions, where you can make ladders glitch out and take them outside the area. So unless there's some other area to get a ladder, you can't really do that anymore. A friend of mine actually did discover an out-of-bounds area near the gas station, where you can go outside the map and you can drive around on the ocean up to the tower. I thought that was a huge discovery. Turns out that's been known for a while now, and isn't actually tied to the third ending, but it was left in as sort of a red herring, so it is cool to be able to drive up to the tower, but you can't actually enter it without the prerequisites, which still haven't been done legitimately. The Essentia dream sequences have been completely redone. They're all unique dreams that are actually really cool and very visual. So a lot of the monologues just about describing Essentia laying in the van and all the hooded figures around her and shit, all of that's gone in favor of unique cutscenes that each have different stuff, and it's really cool. There's also a ton of cutscenes with Michael that were not in the older versions of the game that establish him as sort of an antagonistic force to Alex, which we get more into in New Game Plus, which we'll get to in a bit. But Michael has this entity with him called the Camera that is a Soul Survivor type character, is also said to be Proto-Michael. There's a lot of stuff that's said that contradicts other stuff, so there's a lot of stuff that's hard to keep up with in this game, and again, that's by design because it's very surreal. In fact, ironically, there's a cutscene where Claudio talks about Serial Experiments Lane. Some of the confusion I had in this reminded me of when I watched through Serial Experiments Lane, so, and that's a good thing. I actually liked just how, hazy and, like, over-the-top some of the, postmodernism in it is now. A lot of the new cutscenes do recontextualize certain dialogue. For instance, Alex's look out for us, look out for me, has completely different context in the final cutscene now in the base game, because Alex becomes what is called, and spoiler, here we go, we're gonna start getting into spoilers. Alex becomes what is called the Onism Man, and he gets this suit of armor and a sword, and it's really cool. It's a completely different contextual way that the final lines that Alex has go. And then after you beat the game, you beat the Twisted Beings, which, again, the fight's also been completely overhauled, as they all have. You then get a question from Kisage X at the end of the credits. Something that I'll give a little context to, you're revealed to be the Nameless Child. The Nameless Child is the name that you enter at the beginning of the game now. In addition to, you know, the Chapter 6 Alex that you see. And by the way, the Chapter 6 is removed from the Chapter 6 title card. Now it just says Epilogue. And Chapter 6 is radically different. Like, the way that it's laid out is entirely different than it was in 1.25. But he asks you, do you really think that you're another Alex? If you say yes, the game immediately ends, and you go back to the main menu, not being able to create a new Game Plus file. However, if you say no, then a new Game Plus file is created. So this confirms that you're not actually another Alex, which is something that obviously wasn't as clear in earlier versions. Now, when you get the new Game Plus started, the menu changes to say YIIk 1.5 plus Trinity, and it shows Michael holding a gun. Now, Michael's storyline, like I said, is pretty different. He literally shoots Alex at the end of the main base game. After Alex becomes the Onism Man, Michael tries to kill him. Also, speaking of Michael having a gun, that is actually how you defeat the first Soul Survivor, is anytime your party is either downed or blinded and Michael's the only one, he pulls out a gun which has the capability to kill Soul Survivors, and actually does a decent amount of damage overall. Another thing that's been completely overhauled is the Mine Dungeon. It's an actual area you can explore. It's actually a whole lot of fun to go through. There's now battles in it with these things called foils that you fight the Nameless Child to gain new Carta. And you have to explore finding divine spirits to give to Jocasta to unlock new foil keys so that you can get new Carta. And then you upgrade your Carta in there by talking to them and giving them blood bags to upgrade. And there's some more stuff in the Mine Dungeon in New Game Double Plus as well, which we'll get to in a bit. But overall, the Mine Dungeon is a nice new change. You just choose from one of 3 presets, the Self, the Sun, and the Holy Thief, in order to level up, rather than picking your stats individually. But anyway, when you start New Game Plus, I already knew it was going to be different. However, what I did not expect, and spoiler time, boys, New Game Plus is YIIk 2. They added a free sequel in a free update. 1.5 literally has the sequel in it. Now, it's much shorter than the base game, but it's still pretty decently long. So, YIIk 2, or Y2K2, Benevolent Psychosis, you don't actually play as Alex, although Alex does appear frequently throughout it, actually replacing the Golden Alpaca. Instead of being the Golden Hero, he's the Red Hero. And you see the Good Brother and Bad Brother switched in the Nameless Child sections, which you replay as part of the sequel. But for a lot of the sequel, you play as a new character named Cyril. Now, Cyril is this sort of fantasy RPG-type protagonist who has sort of an elvish look to her, like an elven mage or priestess or something. I'm not exactly sure what to call it, but it's a very fantasy look. She looks like something out of The Legend of Zelda in one of her forms. But then another one of her forms looks kind of like Hatsune Miku. So there's a couple of different ways that Cyril appears. And with Cyril, you're teamed up with Crow, and Crow does appear in the base game as well. For instance, Crow appears in the Wilhelm battle to help you defeat Wilhelm. Crow replaces Marlene as a character, although Marlene does still appear in the Mine Dungeon cutscenes as the original Crow version of himself. But Crow is a personified version of Marlene, and also has more to him revealed when you beat Benevolent Psychosis. Playing through Benevolent Psychosis with Cyril, you go around and have to fight these different bosses, and you have to also replay the Nameless Child sections, but this time with combat. Now, uniquely, neither Cyril nor Nameless Child level up in combat, so your items are really what actually help you be more powerful. As you play through Benevolent Psychosis, you eventually get to this tower. After a while, you switch to Nameless Child, predominantly for the last bit of Benevolent Psychosis, and you go through the Onism Tower. Now, the Onism Tower actually has several, log notes from Michael, which tell you about Michael becoming Proto-Michael and Alex becoming Onism Man, and it reveals Michael's deep hatred for Alex and how Alex fucked up his life. As you progress through this, and again, more spoilers, you find out that the new version of the game, the reason that 1.5 is so different is because Michael altered the story himself. Another recurring theme with Michael's storyline throughout the base game, which ties into stuff that you see throughout the Benevolent Psychosis, is this auction where you buy people's souls. Progressing through the Onism Tower, there's a lot of new scenes with all of the party members. In fact, my favorite scene in the entire game now is the Rory baseball scene, where you play as Nameless Child, pretending to be Carrie. Rory even says, "I know you're not really Carrie, but just pretend." And it's really, really sad.
Oh, hey. You want to play? For old time's sake. So, I guess I'm beating around the bush. I heard you were being bullied at school. What happened?
I don't know what you mean.
Look. I know it's not really you. Can you just play along? Just a favor. So, tell me what they did.
I made fun of you.
Oh man. They should have invited me. I'm my best critic. Well, sorry you caught any shit from my wicked ways. I don't need to know what they said, but I do need you to know that you shouldn't be hurt on my account. I don't even care if you join in. At the end of the day, they're kids, and I don't care what they think. I just don't want to see you hurt. Let's do a few more before it gets too dark.
It's a really sad moment because, you get a lot of sweet, Rory being an older brother, and you find out a little bit more about it. It's easily my favorite scene in the game now. It's really fucking sad. I would say the Chandra one is honestly a little anticlimactic, but it overall is still good. But the Rory one really knocked it out of the park, which, it's fitting since, it's baseball. You also find out that Crow is actually another Michael, who betrays Cyril. And eventually, Benevolent Psychosis ends with you fighting the Onism Man, which is easily the hardest boss fight in the game. Of course, once you defeat the Onism Man, you get the ability to create a new game double plus file, which again returns you either to the beginning of Benevolent Psychosis or the beginning of the original story. You're able to choose, and of course I chose the original story because I wanted to do my New Game Plus Alex. Once you start New Game Double Plus, you're supposed to be able to use the old combat system. This is where I get into some of the negatives of the game. And it's strictly due to the fact that I'm playing the PS4 version. As far as I understand, this is a PS4 specific issue. This game crashes a lot in the PS4 version. Not all the time, but it does crash more frequently. And my friend who was playing it on PS5 had far more crashes than I did, because I'm playing on an actual PS4, he's playing on a PS5. But there are specific spots that always crash. For instance, when you play through Benevolent Psychosis, the opening cutscene to YIIk 2 Benevolent Psychosis always crashes when you get to that big yellow spiral that has the sorcerer come out. It is literally impossible to finish that cutscene in the PS4 version. Also in the PS4 version, it is impossible to use old combat because anytime you go into a battle in old combat, it crashes the game. Now, if you enable dev mode and skip the combat, you're still able to gain EXP that way. And that led me to discover that the EXP systems for old combat and new combat are completely separate systems and function entirely differently and are completely distinct from each other. In fact, when you have old combat active, it takes you to the old mine dungeon rather than the new one. I discovered that because I was playing in old combat and just using dev mode to skip the battles. However, using dev mode to skip these battles doesn't work on bosses, so it's actually impossible to beat any bosses in the old combat, at least as it currently stands. It also does crash pretty frequently after the Perfume King fight at the end of Mount Town Cave. Now, it doesn't always crash there, but both me and my friend got crashes there, so I know it's at least somewhat common. Another place that it always crashes on the PS4 is if you do the party ending. That cutscene that plays at the end of the party ending always crashes as soon as you start it. Party ending is a new ending you get in New Game Double Plus, which involves an entirely new Nameless Child section by doing most of the KNN ending, and then leaving KNN before you go to the point of no return in order to go to an internet cafe and enter the mine dungeon, and then you can go and do an exclusive Nameless Child section, which is really cool, but we'll get to that a little more in a minute. Another thing that some might perceive as a negative, but I actually don't, is that the game says that enemies are supposed to scale with you and that it's supposed to level scale so battles don't become too easy with New Game Plus. That's not true. Like, I still absolutely annihilate enemies in New Game Double Plus. Like, it's still a one-shot kill for a lot of things, so clearly they didn't really implement the scaling in the way that they thought they would. But honestly, I don't have a problem with that. Like I said, part of what I like about playing New Game Plus is being like an overpowered god, so nevertheless, I still had fun with it. Another thing, it soft locks every time you do the KNN ending. It is impossible to create a New Game Double Plus file on the PS4 through the KNN ending, which is supposed to basically be a shortcut that lets you just go straight to New Game Double Plus instead of having to go through Benevolent Psychosis. But every time I've done the KNN ending, as soon as it says, would you like to create a New Game Plus file, I say yes, and then it just sits there and doesn't do anything. I click save, it doesn't save. So, clearly there's an issue with the KNN ending as well. The ending itself plays out, but there's no way to create that New Game Double Plus file that you're supposed to be able to. Another thing that was removed that I was a little disappointed was removed, but I knew going into it because Hellcry told me in one of my stream chats that it would be removed in 1.5. It was either Hellcry or Linguistics. There was a silent protagonist mode that was really funny that you could do in 1.25 if you had dev mode enabled. It was really janky and would crash at times, so I understand completely why it was removed. But it was a funny little feature that I actually really liked in 1.25. Now let's talk about the cutscenes. Cutscenes in this game have largely been replaced. There are now fully rendered cutscenes for most scenarios in the game. That doesn't mean the sprites are completely gone. There's still quite a few instances of the sprites, which is good, because I was worried that they'd cut them out altogether, which would have been really sad for me, because I like the 2D sprites. But most of the major cutscenes have been replaced with full-on cutscenes, similar to the Golden Alpaca cutscene, which is good, because again, those cutscenes are better. Another cool feature, again, we're going back to positives now, during New Game Double Plus, in the Mine Dungeon, you can access Cape Juno. Now, you do go to Cape Juno briefly in Benevolent Psychosis, as part of the end. But you actually get to return to the PAX 2016 demo, which is the Cape Juno section where you have Wilfred as a party member. And it actually gives you access to the flamethrower early, so you can get the flamethrower as soon as you enter the mine dungeon on a New Game Double Plus playthrough. That was really cool. I was really happy to actually get to play through that Cape Juno section that was previously a demo that was not available to play anymore. There's also a secret boss fight in the mine dungeon where you fight Xiananu, which is Proto-Ultima Alex's character design. I could not for the life of me figure out how to do that. I thought you just had to be level 100, but clearly that's not the case. I did do the party ending, which, again, is a new ending when you go into a internet cafe during the KNN ending, and then you go into the mine dungeon. And when you go in and do that section, it's a lot of platforming, which is fun, but it also got frustrating to try and find all the hearts, because you gotta find all these hearts and destroy them. And then you talk to Essentia. I did actually watch the actual ending cutscene, because that crashes as soon as you open the email that triggers the cutscene in the party ending on PS4. But I did watch it online, and it's a pretty simple ending where Michael comes out of the computer and embraces Nameless Child. But yeah, like I said, I never did figure out how to do that Xiananu fight, but I'll still keep trying, because I'm going to keep playing through the game over and over again, because it's a fun game. So yeah, that's 1.5, or IV, of YIIk. It's a completely new experience. It's got a sequel added onto it. It's got new content added to New Game Double Plus. It's got entirely new cutscenes. It's got entirely new boss battles. It's got entirely new characters and party members, and you can actually switch your party members out on a New Game Double Plus file to have Nameless Child or Crow actually be in your party on an Alex playthrough, which is pretty cool. By comparison to this, 1.25 feels incomplete as a game now that I've played 1.5. It almost feels like 1.25 was a beta type. It's a night and day difference, the game. It's an entirely much more complete game, and it's great. it's shot up quite a bit in my ranking of RPGs. I actually rank this above Undertale now, which I know is ironic to bring up because the YIIk fan base, not exactly the keenest on Undertale or Toby Fox, but YIIk is better than Undertale. I fucking love YIIk. It's easily one of my favorite RPGs. 1.5 carried it even higher. It's easy, like, I think it might even be top 5 at this point as far as RPGs. At the very least, it's top 6, but it might even be top 5. It's definitely up there. YIIk is a great game, and it would be an amazing game if they could just patch out those crashes. Now, I know that they're doing a patch on the Switch version, so hopefully the PS4 version will soon get a patch that allows old combat to work, fixes the crashes in cutscenes, and makes it work a little better in that regard. The crashes are really the only thing that holds it back from being, like, amazing. Even then, it still is. The crashes, it's nothing too game-breaking, there's just a couple of things that don't work properly, but overall, the game is fucking great, and I think anyone who plays it is gonna have a hard time hating on it. Like, all of those video essays shitting on it, I don't think they got shit on 1.5. 1.5, I think it's impossible to try and call a bad game. It's fucking great. Anyway, this has been Fugitive Red-Eye. This review's been a little disorganized and rambly, but I hope that it got my point across, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. Toodles.
You take forever to say nothing.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red-Eye.